everyone, Ernie Tech here, and I want to continue our horsing around with MTS. And I have my usual collection here. I got my mug, I got my coffee, I have the boss sitting here on a chair looking at me, just supervising. I give the boss the 5 things that I've accomplished every day or every week. We still doing that? Hard to say. Anyhow, let's talk about a couple of things in moving along with MTS. The first thing I would talk about is some of the documentation available. One of the sources that I really enjoy is from the University of Alberta, and I found these things at various places on the net. A couple places have shut down. If you go to Rupert Lane's try-mts.com, you'll find links to a lot of the sources that have moved around. So I think they went from um, a Blue Archive, IBM Archive, whatever it was, over to archive.org. So they're still around. But the things that are kind of tough to find are the University of Alberta Computing Center publications, and that's these things over here. And these are concise, to the point, and rather readable overviews, guides, as it were, for this system. Now, the way they differ from the University of Michigan is, well, first of all, they're a lot less dense. I think they're really designed for the academic world and for the students and so on. And the University of Michigan ones are the be all. If you want to understand how this thing works, of course, you go to the source. So the difference is tremendous. For instance, right now, this guide here is 16 pages long. That's all it is, and that's just the introduction. And each of these things is rather short. So let's look at a couple of different ones. Fortran, G&H, a little early on for that, 63 pages. Files and devices, 56 pages. Commands, 33. Batch user guide, 17. Very short. To the point. That's good for us. That's good for starting. And if you want to look at, let's say, some of the documentation that came from the University of Michigan, you come over here, for instance, the file editor is 210 pages long. And that's not uncommon. There's an awful lot of, it's a lot of stuff in here. For instance, the operator's manual, the MTS operator's manual is 552 pages. And some of my notes, utilities in there is, anyhow, you get the gist. Let me just back over to where I was. And there I'd be, actually I want to be here because I'm going to get into the file editor a tiny little bit. So I have a lot of comments in my different video sections. Everybody's comments are fantastic, and I really appreciate them. One of the comments that I got was from Dr. Renee Furland, who was, he saw that I was struggling a little bit as far as the screen scrolling, the line-by-line presentation, which I assume was for a terminal environment on paper. So if you had an old typewriter type environment. For us, we don't need to do that. We need to just have it quickly display. So what you do here is you type in Control msource, okay, and then page. And what that does is that just lets everything scroll by page much faster than if you were doing it line by line. So learn something new from you guys. Appreciate it very much. What do we have here as far as the introduction? So I'm going to go on the belief that at the University of Alberta they had an academic environment which was students, teachers, maybe administrative people who were using this, but they were outside of the computing center. They were not part of the IT team. Was it called IT back in those days? No, I think it was called DP. I think it was data processing. So the IT moniker came later on. Tell me about that. I'm sure you guys can tell me exactly that when it went from data processing to information technology, probably somewhere in the 80s. I bet it's when PCs started to come into the equation. Acknowledgments and so on. But remember, this is only 16 pages long, and what it does is it gives you an introduction. It says, well, here it is. This is why it exists. And one of the other things is that, like, for instance, copy, news, describe. We're outside of our element. We can't be in the computing center of the University of Alberta or Michigan. It doesn't exist anymore. They exist, but not with MTS. So we're in our own little computing center. So you're not going to get news. Nothing's going to happen. The system. Something to keep in mind, and that is that MTS is a job. MTS is a series of jobs or a collection of jobs or whatever you want to call it, and it runs inside of a supervisor program called the UMMPS, which is the University of Michigan Multi-Programmer System. And as I read it, it is a interface to the hardware. And on its own, it's not an operating system per se. You have to have MTS on top of it or whatever would work on top of it. In this case, it's MTS. So MTS is as much of a job as anything else. The other thing that they used was the Houston Automatic Spooling Priority System, which is essentially the batch manager. So you can have different jobs running simultaneously and so on. Otherwise, you're in just you mode. So those are a couple of things that I have learned. So we go down here, and there's a lot of information. I won't read it to you because hey, you can read it. This is all available on my website at the second entry, which was MTS. I think the second entry, but it's in the MTS area, and you can link right to these things and open them up from there, or download them, or do as you please. I'm trying to remember if I included them in the docs for the in the zip file. I might have. Yeah, might want to find them there as well. All right. Here's what comes with it or came with it, because I can't say that it comes with it now. I'd have to go through and look at everything. But at the time, these are the kinds of the systems or the kinds of utilities or environments or whatever you want to call it that came with it. So if you were going to do some Fortran programming, Fortran is there, PL1, and so on. You had the basic language program, which we tried before. It works pretty well. There's a couple of things that aren't listed in here, as far as I can tell. Maybe they didn't come at the University of Alberta. Maybe they were only at the University of Michigan or the other places. I think the University of Delaware used this as well. And one of them was the Utilisp, which was from Tokyo. University of Tokyo, I believe, used that one. That was from them. So Utilisp was that interactive environment that we talked about before. So these things came from all over the place. And that's kind of the neat thing about it, is all of these different universities contributed to the development and expansion of the MTS operating system and environment. So in a sense, it's kind of a shame it's all been sort of put by the wayside, but hey, time moves on, right? Simulation languages, editing, and so on. Now, I want to play around with edit a little bit later on in this video. And I will tell you, I will warn you, it's dense. It is I wouldn't go far to say boring, but it's not exactly exciting. And more importantly, I haven't really delved into it, and I have all the expectation in the world to fall all over this thing, and I want you to join me in falling all over how to use this. Worst case scenario, I just kill everything and reinstall it, but wouldn't be the first time. All right, the manuals that come from the University of Alberta, most of them are here, which is great. Some of them aren't. I have not been able to find a couple of them. Like I haven't found, I think, the virtual machines or the assembler. So if you know where they are, let me know. Something else I want to talk about, which may be helpful if you're doing some teaching. Now, I was a teacher. I did teach AutoCAD. Now, yeah, it was a very esoteric thing back in the 80s, especially. I got in AutoCAD very, very early at version 2.6. And I dove into that thing headlong. I was so involved that I was actually had gone to California quite a few times, to San Rafael, to the Autodesk headquarters, and I was on the Autodesk exam team. Back in the day when you took all those dopey certifications, which basically were worthless, but we didn't think so. And so I was deep into it, and I had taught for 15 years at different levels. I taught at the community college near me as an adjunct. I taught at the technical college in one of the counties nearby, and that was a big thing back in the day. Now it's more like on the desktop for architects, engineers, and designers, the same way as just about everything else is. So being an AutoCAD specialist is way in the past, but in the day that's what it was. But as I got to stop rambling here on this, one of the things I learned early on is to get the glossary, get the lexicon, get the terms that we're going to use in front of people in the very beginning of the class. There's nothing worse than having students who get lost quickly, and you can real fast, because these are This is tough stuff. AutoCAD's a difficult environment, and a lot of the terminology had not been seen before or heard before by a number of the people that I was teaching. So I learned early on to get it out there, talk about the different terms that we're going to use, and it made a heck of a difference to be sure that people were not just kind of quietly lost, and that's exactly what could happen. So the glossary is really good here. It's on page 13 of 16. It's not comprehensive, but I think for our purposes, or at least for the purposes of the people that were going to use it at the University of Alberta, it was a pretty good way of getting you to understand what it is you're talking about. All right, so again, we're looking at the different University of Alberta documents here. For instance, another one here is file and device. Files and devices. Now, notice only 56 pages in comparison to what the equivalent would be from the University of Michigan, which would be much denser. So let's just go down here. The usual disclaimers. Hey, kids, don't try this at home. The usual stuff. Different kinds of files, different organization of files, whether you have line files or sequential files. What's in the files? Line numbering, the way you reference the lines, the way you trim, and so on. File manipulation. We went into that a little bit earlier. It's pretty involved, to be honest. So let's just go through this a little tiny bit. For instance, file names. What can you call a file? What's the difference between a private file, which is what I would have here as a user STO1, and public files, which were the kinds of files that were available to everybody to access, or at least to use as a compiler or something, or a utility. What scratch files are, and so on. The device names. The device names are cool because if you were going into the Hercules configuration file in the root of the MTS-TK that I had provided, you're going to open that file up and you're going to see references to these things. And the references are the same as if it was an actual device. So your virtual device on your PC, which would be some file. For instance, the reader or the printer would be a file, and this is, of course, what it would have referred to in the real world, which, are we not in the real world? Sometimes I wonder. Logical units, where you can pull data from, the names of these things, pseudo device names. For instance, the source here, if you are on a command line and you want to get some things from the source. Let's see if I can get this to work. If I said create hi there dot txt, I probably have one, who knows. All right, so there you have it. If I want to list and see what I have out there, whoops, let me get out of that. And if I wanted to say fi, there it is, another test.pl. So right there, hi there.txt. We did this before. This is nothing. This is nothing new. But if I wanted to copy into it, I could say copy source hi there txt, and hi there is a file and another line. Oops. More coffee. You get it. Another line here, and I say end file. All it did there, of course, was to take everything from the source, which is the keyboard, and dump it into that file there. And then if I wanted to list it out, I could just say fi hi there txt, and it would give me the information about it. I would fast the file information, but it would print it out if I wanted it to. So anyhow, you get the gist. The M source is the name of the keyboard. It is the pseudonym for it. All right, moving along. Same thing if you wanted it to go somewhere else. The master file or sync file for device is the terminal or the operation of the printer for batch operations. You get into it. M source is the same thing. Is defined as the master input or source file for a device, is the terminal or conversational operation, blah, 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 blah. But that's one of the things that I had done here to change the mode. So I was looking at things from a page, from a quick view versus a line-by-line view. I would change the mode by copying right from the source to the page type. So that's what I did there. Hope I said that right. So this is what happens. You go through here and you learn about the different ways in which MTS interprets files, the way you can control files, the way you can list them, write them. If you wanted to feed, let's say, a file that was supposed to be a line-by-line representation of cards, if you wanted to feed them to a particular program, you could do so by identifying which cards you wanted and only those cards. You could identify where the source the cards came from. You can identify what cards to start with and what cards to end with. So you can really be specific with this thing. I mean, really be specific. File organization, line files versus sequential files being more accustomed to in the PC environment. Same thing. How you define the different lines. Um, let's see what else. So that gives you a sense of how the files and devices are organized, at least from the standpoint of the University of Alberta documentation. And I'm not trying to go through it with a fine-tooth comb because, frankly, um, you'll fall asleep and so will I. But at some point in time, I guess it's fun to go ahead and do that. And actually, what I want to do, just for fun, it's for fun here. Oops. Not the efficient way to do it, I know. Let's destroy gosh, destroy hi there.txt. Yes, I want to kill it, and it dutifully carries out my demands. I could have emptied it. I could have done a lot of things to it, but in this case here, I got rid of it because why keep it around? All right, moving along here. Let's see what other things get down there. Excuse me for all the just scrolling through, but there's an awful lot of information here. And yet, in the University of Alberta stuff, it's actually truncated. It's actually much more. Um, it's it's a tighter grouping of things to know versus the one that you would get from the University of Michigan. All right, let's go on. Anyhow, next kind of thing. Let's go over to commands. Same kind of thing. 33 pages going into great detail about the different kinds of commands that you can give MTS and what they do and why they do it, and the different way in which you reference different files name, device names, how you can get into into the innards of the file for various purposes, um, equivalent like punch card equivalents, commands. Of course, we know about sign on. Create, we just did a create. We just did a destroy. We can do an empty versus getting rid of the file itself. We can change the source for where the information goes or comes from. Change the destination for output. Copy commands, list commands. So that's what I wanted to do before there. So if I wanted to list hello PL1, there it is. Now, before I made the change that Dr. Ferland had recommended, which was great, it would have done line by line, slowly going through each one. But so if you could put that control M source page in here, it'll just pop right out on you there. So these are elemental commands. These are the kinds of things you would do for the most part if you were using this thing for a class, I suppose. Or this is not the stuff that you'd be using for as an administrator. Okay, some other stuff here. Let's batch users guide, which I'm going to think is the HASP. Is this interpretation of HASP? Or, yeah, it is. The MTS batch function is controlled by a program known as HASP, used in Automatic Explorer priority system. And then, when we start this thing up after we IPL it, then you go right in there, you type in the HASP command, and then you start the hasplings, and then let the lines out and all that kind of stuff. And then you do the release exe or release ex, which essentially tells HASP go to town, get to work. Only 17 pages here, and this is cool too because you can see that there are notes. We're going back in time, and I forget what author. It might have been Carl Sagan that said one of the great things is that you can have a conversation with people who are long gone, or if they're not long gone, you'll never be able to talk to them. But you're having a conversation with them because there's notes there. This is what they typed in. So that's great. Input decks, essentially the kind of cards that you would have the inputs from like the equivalent cards. I would love to have a box of cards from back in the day. They had bazillions of them. They must have had hundreds of millions of cards. Where the heck did they all go? They just get trashed? Anyway, passwords, set your password, some elemental administration stuff, batch execution. All right, moving on. Let's see what's next in the collection. Files and devices. Let me go back. Let me go back here. Hold on a second here. So this is the batch users guide. Go on to the next one, which is scroll to the top. We talk about that one, commands. Yes, we did. So anything that's still in the middle of the PDF is because I had already looked at it. So that was your files and devices. Fortran, G and H, which we're not going to worry about too much, but it's 63 pages worth of stuff. And this is your introduction. We did that already. MagTape User's Guide. Well, the mount command is important. That's one of those things that happens if in the boot up process it tells you that it needs to have a tape mounted, more or less. The kinds of tracks that were involved, parity. This is actually pretty cool to read. I scroll to the top so I can get to the top. Scroll to the top to get to the top, you know? When I was a younger guy, I belonged on a bowling team. And we had a gentleman who was from Brazil, great guy. And he had the greatest statement that he would make whenever someone would just barely get a strike. He would yell, and I won't do the accent, but it was the only way you could really appreciate it. He would yell, "Hit 9, you get 9." And that was constant. I always remember that. Hit 9, you get 9. About terminal users, which is probably more important than we think. Because if I sat down and read this, which I think I'm going to do after I do this, this will help me to understand exactly what I'm doing with some of the ways this thing works. The other thing I need to do is really sit down and read the instructions of the WC3270 emulator. There's a lot of customization I want to get to. Things to do. All right, and the utilities. This will be the final one for right now. So the utilities are all the different little things that you have available to you, different kinds of, list the updates and the time and tasks and users and so on and so forth. What's this one here? Convert lines with an ASA printer cartridge. I'm not sure that's going to be all that useful to us. Module of the BCD to EBCD conversion. Cool. And yeah, it's a lot of the stuff here that we probably will never use. I know I'm not going to use it, but it's there. But what I want to do for right now, though, so that's the University of Alberta stuff. Look it up, find it. It's on my webpage. Download it if it's not a part of the zip file, and they're great. It's great reading. I want to go over here to the file editor information, and I want to make a complete fool of myself and join me for the ride. So here we are, February of 1988. So 1988, I was right in the middle of the AutoCAD craze, probably version 88. Not version 12 yet, maybe version 9. It was still in DOS. Everything was in DOS. Fun stuff. All right, so I was going to do something, and I may do this next time, where I put MTS and Music XP up next to each other and play around with the editors there. I might do that. That seems like a lot of fun. But for right now, I'm just going to horse around a little bit with the editor. And in this thing here, it tells you everything you need to know in incredible detail how to utilize the editor. So what you do is just type in the edit command. Now, you can put the edit command in and give it a file name. Let's do that. So hello.pl1 is already there. Let's see what she does with that. And so there's your initial listing, hello, procedure, options, main. This was the PL1 thing. There's other command. It's a visual. Let me see if it works. It does. So the visual command is really elementary. and apparently it costs no money whatsoever. And you can work around in here in a visual format. But I have not really played around with this at all. So there's the lines. So there is the visual version of how you work in the edit command. And it also reminds me a little bit of Music SP, except that Music SP at the bottom had a ton of great stuff to help you understand what the heck was going on. So here I am in this, and not quite sure exactly how I get out of this thing. So somebody will tell me. And there's your columns and so on. And maybe there's a there's the old-fashioned way. Let's just try something here. Let's see if I can get out of this thing here. And I can, yeah. The P. If all else fails, you go up here and hit PA1, and that gets you out of there real fast. But you can see how it looked. It's a visual environment, but it's not one that gives you much information at all. You really have to be over here in this environment to tell it what it is that you want to do. You want to tell it exactly what you want to work on. You want to tell it exactly what you need it to do, and there's not a lot of information. There might be a help facility. Yeah, there's a little bit. Let's try this here. I say help everything. Let me know everything. Hold on here. And let me figure this out. Explain. Explain everything? That is ambitious, isn't it? Well, it's explaining everything, and there it is. It's essentially telling you, here's what I can do. Here's the different commands in this editor. And yeah, again, 210 pages of documentation for the editor and various prompts, I guess. All else fails, and it will. Get the heck out of Dodge and get back to the command prompt. So there's what I meant when I said I am still fooling around with this and trying to learn it. I don't really think I'm going to spend a tremendous amount of time learning it. It's more for the enjoyment of discovery. As a comparator, I enjoy the Music SP environment better only because it holds your hand. Now, how am I going to feel about NVS when the time comes? We'll find out. Anyhow, that's what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk a little bit about the different documentation you can get, and especially the University of Alberta stuff, which I think is great. How comprehensive, I mean comprehensive, the file editor environment is just something else. And if you have the time and interest, or if you were professionally involved in this and you needed to understand it, yeah, you have a real serious environment to work in. On the downside, as I said before, it's super powerful, but not super accommodating. It expects you to read. It expects you to know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, then you watch the Ernie Tech's Little Mainframe channel. So we can do it together. All right. Anyhow, that's what I wanted to talk about at this time on this video. My boss is looking at me. He's got his kitty cat watch on, telling me that I need to wrap up because he's not paying me overtime. All right, boss, I got you. Okay, please subscribe if you haven't. Thanks for all the great comments. They're fantastic. And I will, as usual, talk to you again soon. Bye for now.